my name is Ashley. I'm one of the co-founders of Resource. Today is going to be a workshop, so participatory discussion and session. So we're going to be going through some kind of ideas around a framework for how do we build financial equity, not inclusion, through decentralization. And the distinction of saying equity is meaning that when we say inclusion, we're a little bit referring to like people can come into this system that's already built. And financial equity is getting to this idea that we really need to build new systems. Actually, the system itself is what is problematic. So if we want to achieve financial equity, it's up to us and this crypto space, this social change movement, to start to figure out new models. So this is very much meant for you to participate, and this is the beginning of us starting to workshop some of these ideas, and hopefully we'll be doing more of this in the future. Okay, so why does crypto need this? So crypto, I would argue, has set out with some really high, lofty goals since the beginning. I've been in the space since 2014. I've seen a lot of intentions, and I've also seen a lot of problematic choices that haven't allowed us to live up to those intentions. So what do? I'm suggesting we make a framework to help keep us accountable to these goals that we have. Also a rebrand. So why is Refi popping off? I think it's because people are saying, actually, I want to distinguish myself from what crypto has been doing. I want to associate myself with something different. I think this is a really good thing, and we should really continue to cultivate that and help people understand what really is different about Refi and what we're doing here. The final thing is a change in our perspective. So this is the more difficult part, and I think it's the most important part. You know, we set out in this crypto space saying we could change all of these things. The next question I'm going to ask, how are we actually doing? And perhaps we really need to get to this point of how do we change our perspectives in terms of what we're actually doing here and what our work is. So this is an open question. How, whatever you want to say. How do you think we're doing? How are we living up to our potential? You can kind of give a letter grade and give a little bit of feedback. I'll bring a mic too. You can do that, thank you. You can literally just say a letter grade. A C+, not C++. Okay. Can you say a little bit more? Why you feel it?
Me first. I would say that, I don't know if this works or not, but I think that there's like a lot of ambitions and still a lot of need for more infrastructure and accurate data to like really connect things and make more of an equilibrium between like your traditional financial system and your DeFi or Refi to find that equilibrium and take the best of both worlds. And I think right now there's still a lot of opposition from each side trying to outdo each other, but I think the equilibrium and bringing those together kind of is the sweet spot.
So we're like competing and we're in a silo rather than trying to like integrate and build upon what we already have. Cool.
Yep. I would say that there are testing. All right. I would say that there's some really cool experiments that got lavishly funded, and experimentation is good, and I've seen a lot of things happen that probably wouldn't have happened with traditional financial funding vehicles. And then I've seen a lot of people get distracted and get high on money and kind of forget why they started. And for me, the original use case of cross-border, instant, frictionless mobile payments, which is actually why I got excited about Celo in the first place. I saw that potential with Bitcoin like 8 years ago, and I started using it as a payments network. But I don't think crypto in 8 years has really nailed even that one basic use case. So that's why I say C-.
So I support the C- or the lower scores. And yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I feel like it's easy to feel disappointed, right? And it's easy to feel like it's not fair. Yeah.
Drop it a little bit lower to maybe a D. I think that we've seen a lot of ambition, a lot of a lot of ideas being developed that I think can do a lot of good, but also a tremendous amount of parallels between the systems we've seen as broken today, just manifesting on chain. And if we're trying to manifest a new reality or a paradigm shift, then there needs to be demonstrable change in how those systems are structured and who they're targeted to benefit. And I think that that's one area that we could really focus on really shifting.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I agree with all this. And, you know, we've had a decentralized protocol since 2008, and we're here in 2022. And I think it's time for us to be kind of honest with ourselves what has shifted since then. So we'll get a little bit more into some things. So then let's bring it back. Like, what problems do we say that we're actually solving? So I think this is important to break it down when we're going to talk about where are we going. So bringing it back to how do we actually say what we're doing here? So centralization leading to inequality. I think that's one of the biggest ones in the space. Corruption. All of these kind of go hand in hand. They're kind of different facets of the same underlying root problems. Illegitimate data, broken systems with bad incentives, capitalism, like the negative impacts of it, or you can, you know, that depends upon your viewpoint of how you want to say that. That's a big loaded word. But yeah, curious if anyone has other things that they want to add of like, what do we think this crypto movement in general is setting out to solve? Is there any? Okay, so what's cool about Refi? So now we're talking about the problems that we think that we're solving. I think as we're going in this direction of saying, let's kind of take a rebrand, let's talk about what we're doing differently. When we talk about Refi, I think it helps us contextualize and simplify this problem. So all of those other examples that we just showed, I would argue are kind of fractals of this overarching principle, which is that extractive economics are failing us and our natural ecosystems. So we need new financial systems that are regenerative, both to our relationships to each other and our communities, and to our natural ecosystems. And then through that, we can exit this escalating destructive cycle. So I think that's why we're actually all coming back to the basics right now and sort of reframing why we're all here. So what are our possible outcomes or goals? So this is important to define if we're going to talk about a framework. What are we using the framework for? So developing alternative economic systems. We're breaking from this like capitalistic trajectory, which is enhancing extractive economics. It doesn't mean we're breaking from capitalism, but it means that the aspects of capitalism that are heading in that direction. So that's pretty fundamental when we're talking about building new systems. Similarly, this was brought up, as we're building new systems, we're not just taking the old system and putting them on new tools, which is like 99% of blockchain today. And that's not to blame anyone. That's actually just a failure of us not doing a few things, like taking some time, doing experiments, doing iteration. Building financial equity, you know, not just inclusion, but saying, how does the system itself start to achieve these principles of equity? Empowerment, access to credit, overall decentralizing our access to building wealth and power. So these are like what I would say we're actually here to talk about when we're saying, what is this framework achieving? Okay, so similarly, would you say now that we've reframed it in this Refi context and this sort of like overarching goals, C-, D-, we're still about there? I think that's where we are. I don't think that we're definitely not further in that direction. If anything, we're kind of worse in the grade score of how we're progressing. Yeah. I think the important part of this is that we have proven to the world that blockchain-based systems could be used as an alternative. We have not proven that that alternative is any better. If anything, we've proven that that alternative can almost exacerbate some underlying problems. Ethan Buckman has said this, so I'll quote him, that essentially what we've done is make the problems in our system more transparent. And I think that is arguably at least what we can say today that we've progressed towards. So now that we're being honest with ourselves, how can we start to improve? So we can develop a framework, we can follow a framework. So that's the beginning of this discussion today. The Refi rebrand, or other types of rebrand, I think are very important. Okay, so changing our perspective. So we haven't talked about this yet. Spending more time implementing rather than designing. I think one of the big problems in the blockchain space is we've always had this tendency to isolate ourselves in these little code laboratories, come up with these perfect systems, talk about how perfect they are, and only talk about them to each other. And then the time spent implementing it is time saying, hey, we've built this more perfect system, come adopt it. And what's happened? Not a lot of people have actually adopted it. So what do we do instead? Maybe we just create these little experiments, go out, do a little bit of a pilot, learn from it, figure out what works, figure out what doesn't, communicate about that. So getting more into this type of mindset. Similarly, spend more time researching, collaborating, listening with existing social change movements, existing communities that you're wanting to serve, rather than figure out what's our business model first, right? The early tech industry actually showed us that if you just built these systems, people use them, you figured out how to make a business model. Not necessarily we should be replicating those types of business models, but taking some of those principles into practice. How do we just build stuff that people want to use outside of this space? It's something that we haven't really gotten good at. And to add to that, I would say it's not just with the legacy financial system, it's also a lot of different systems, especially the civil society organizations or people doing social change. I think those are the people that if we're not convincing them that we're doing something really, really wrong. So those are the people that have already decided that they want to go out and change things. So I think there's also that side of things we want to figure out. That's also part of a rebrand. Because in theory, crypto is supposed to do that. It's kind of been implemented in this old way. But I think that's getting at the point of what we can do as a space of innovators and with the technology itself if we start to change the incentives. Okay, we have 15 minutes. Okay, this is an exercise to, now we've talked about the theoretical abstract. If you have ideas of projects that you know about that you think are exemplifying this direction, I think we should name them here. And you have to name the project and you have to name a trait. Why? A trait of that project. So I think it's important for this exercise too. The project itself as a whole may not exemplify all of this, but you can pick out a principle from the project. So I'm going to move on. Okay. Sorry? Okay. Yeah, I think also that we get the point of the project one. I mean, to me, the point is still, it's about what aspect of the project are we talking about rather than the project as a whole. And that's what I'm trying to get across, is that for most of these projects, Ethica might be the one I would say, well, actually Gitcoin too. But for a lot of these projects, they're still kind of only one little piece. They haven't really developed a more holistic system about what's actually better about crypto. So I think that's where we're trying to elucidate more, what are the aspects of these projects that we want to scale up, and how do we want to refine them so they're actually achieving these goals. So of course, we still have a lot of work to do. Okay, so let's just talk about the Refi Framework. Uh-oh. Okay, here it comes. So these are some principles that we have put together. And I think it encapsulates a lot of what was here, but the point is to go through them, understand them, and then we should add to this list. And as part of adding to this list, we want to do more discussions, events, collaboration, alliances, basically around how do we actually start to say, yes, we're a project that supports going in this direction. So it's meant to be supportive in terms of all of us who are here and who are here for these larger reasons, so to help us start to get to that point. So a Refi framework, regenerative impact. Is the project regenerating relationships between each other and natural ecosystems? It's a very general one, but I think it's one of the most important. real human impact. Like, are actual people impacted by this? Are people outside of the crypto industry who are investors, traders, and speculators benefiting, and benefiting in a real way? And I think this is when the bear market is elucidating a lot of projects that, no, they were not actually, they had no concept of real human impact other than a promise of one day we will deliver that. Real economic impact. So this is kind of a different way of saying, are people actually not only, are they benefiting in a way that they're empowered? They have more access to credit, like in the Ethic Hub example. Did they get more funding from the philanthropic example? How do we understand that people are actually, improving their livelihoods or improving their economic situation through these projects? Access, so we've talked about this. Can people access your project without having to sit down and download like a README, for example? Are they able to really understand how to use it in a really simplistic way? And I think for a lot of the early designs that we've seen of systems, to participate early requires time, expertise, capital, right? Like that's the MakerDAO, the Aave example. And while it is going in this idea of permissionless, what does permissionless mean if access to capital is a fundamental requirement? Mobile phones, yeah, that's a good direction. What does it mean if mobile phones are not in access? These are just general things that we could think about. So disruptive capacity. So is it just an old system with a new tool, or is fundamentally it using decentralization to maybe not disrupt, I don't know who said that, but to maybe upcycle or shift the system? That might be a better way to say that. Actually, I'm gonna add that. True decentralization. So this is my favorite one because people in blockchain love to say like, oh, is it truly decentralized? But oftentimes when we're saying that, we still mean like access to capital is fundamental to be able to participate. So even though it's decentralized, many people have no way of actually participating. So I think this is one of the key principles that as a space, we need to start to learn how to apply. A lot of people have said this, synergistic potential. Is it a silo, or is it building an infrastructure that could be used and replicated across projects? That's a pretty important part of building open source protocols and to be able to integrate with legacy systems. And then future-proof sustainability. Is it creating negative externalities, or is it actually regenerating what we're building? Okay, these are the 8 principles that we have so far. I'd love if anyone wants to, we have like 5-ish minutes, and these are kind of our last moments. So I'd love if anyone wants to add some principles or concepts that they don't think have been covered yet by these 8. And if you do, it'll be updated in the framework. So we have these 14 principles. I will write another post and encapsulate them so that we can start to understand how to apply these to our projects. Some ideas we have are making an alliance, essentially, of projects that want to adhere to these principles. We can have discussions about, what does it actually mean to say that you adhere to them? It's not just like slapping a logo on your protocol website. It would actually probably require a little bit more than that to explain how we're actually doing that. But yeah, I'd love to hear other ideas of, now that we've kind of gone through this process, we've gone through this workshop. Obviously, this workshop could be replicated. Other people could give the workshop. Other people could start to use the framework. I would just love to open it up if anyone wants to add anything else that they'd like to see come out of this work. All right, well, thanks for entertaining this today. I think this was helpful to get us out of this place of, here I am pitching you my project and why it's so great, and more of us saying, we're all here to make something really different, and to your point, it's going to take some time, and we're not rushing. And so I think, as a whole, I am looking forward to seeing more of this type of work in the space. So thank you very much, and that's Resource, and that's my Twitter if you want to follow along about more of this work.